sort of, what everything should refer to, which I find ironic. So let's take something that isn't fit for the purpose of what we're doing and use it as the context to plan our task. Crazy.
Hi guys.
Hello.
Hi, Frode.
Closing window. Final few days of PhD writing. It's not so much fun, especially considering I only know what I'm doing the very moment Dave Miller tells me what I'm doing.
Yeah, well, like I say, it's a constant battle for the right to colour outside the lines. You'll get there. I remember my last few days before the submission left me well fried, as my wife reminds me.
It's rough. Anyway, Peter, your dad's okay?
Yeah, he's improving.
That's good. Very good.
It's bad because when you're 89, even a little fall can really throw you for a long loop.
Yeah, absolutely. Hey, Rafael. You're back.
Hello.
You're back.
Fix my audio.
Your audio is fine, but your face is a bit frozen. Rafael, don't forget, your brother has to come pick up the books.
Yes.
Hey, Adam.
Hey,
Glad you're here. And Brendan's coming. Chris Guttridge did something interesting that I'd like to show you guys. Gonna get to the right kind of page.
We had a great finish yesterday. I hadn't realised Brendan's in a really long room because I had a real Father Ted moment of this Brendan is close, this Brendan is far away. Because I was expecting him to walk to the back of the room and sort of be the same size, but he's actually just disappeared, smaller and smaller as it went away. It's quite a nice effect.
I have no idea what you're talking about. Not
seen Father Ted? Well, you should.
Oh yeah, no, I have. But in regards to what yesterday,
I think so. When I look at the background behind Brendan, it doesn't look that deep. But when he got up the other day and walked away, it was a Father Ted moment because he got much smaller as he went to the back of the room, which wasn't what the perspective was telling me at all.
Yeah, that's a good point. So yeah, I just want to show you this. I have been bugging people to do some visual meta outside of what we're doing. So I had a conversation with Christopher Guttridge, whom some of you just met. This is a plugin that we developed long time ago. This is based on Hyperword. So this stuff goes back, this little dot, just a very long time. Anyway, so what we have focused on is you point to that little dot. This is a WordPress plugin. It's a bit important. And you choose copy Bibtex. And then you go to author and you paste. Hang on. That didn't get the name. Okay, delete that off the video. Maybe because I did it twice.
Copied visual meta. Interesting.
Yeah, it's supposed to be visual meta, but it also, so, okay, I'm just copying arbitrary text, copy Bibtex, and it says copied visual meta. That's just a language issue. Here we go. Cool, right?
Oh, very nice.
So what it does is actually produce this. So the nice things in here is we had an issue in the beginning, and I've now updated our visual meta page because implementing visual meta on exported documents and on clipboard, because it's not the same thing. Visual meta on the clipboard is actually 100% Bibtex, end of story. Because change is expensive, right? So we're going to use everything as it is in the world as much as we can. So it literally is just that. So this is generated based on WordPress because WordPress can tell you the name of the author and upload time and all of that good stuff. And he also implemented before, this is a discussion Chris, Mark, and I had many times, high resolution linking. So I go to new tab and I paste that link in. And it highlights, it's not the prettiest highlight, but it's a strong, effective highlight. This is the copied text. This is the selected text.
Oh, very nice.
Cool, right?
Mm.
So in my dear thesis, which this is the framework of, I have now put that in here under implementations by other parties. So this is explanation of what you just saw. And there you go. So that was my little update for today. I'm seeing my advisors for the last time ever in a professional capacity on what's called Thursday in the morning, and then at 2:30 in the afternoon, Edgar is being taken to see Hamilton. So it's a day of mixed emotions.
Yeah.
Is there any chance we can watch your defense online?
Oh, the Viva? I don't know, Mark. How does it work in this country? It's a bit different.
Actually, no. Well, they're certainly, they're not normally public, and they're not set up to be, but not out of any great sense of privacy, but just because I guess it's not been the tradition. I suspect if you try to ask now, all sorts of people go bananas about privacy, but for all the wrong reasons. So it's probably best not asked about. No, so it's normally just your examiners and the candidate, and I think you're allowed to have a sort of prisoner's friend, which actually people do normally.
Did you say prisoners' friends?
Yeah, prisoner's friend to sit by you, which actually is useful because it normally ends up people have one of their supervisors just to write down stuff, so you're not trying to speak and take notes and sort of multifunction like that.
Oh, okay.
But no, the idea is for people who are not particularly sort of zen, that it's nice to have someone just sort of someone, a friend in the room, as it were.
So it's not like a game show where you get to make one call out for a friend to give you help.
Yes.
Yeah, that sounds like it. So yeah, it's been a bit stressful. It's still stressful. I have to do more coding of the expert interviews. And I still don't actually know what it means. I think I know, and then I do stuff, and then it doesn't make sense, and I get help. But anyway, that's stuff. But
that's the nature of coding. Yeah, absolutely. You think you've done it, and then you realize that you now need to resection it yet again.
Yes. So, but one thing I would like to ask is if any of you have anything that relates directly to visual meta, I'd like to put it in. I have a section called stuff other people made under impact. So Peter, what you worked on, was that a validator? What would you call it?
A parser for visual meta. So it was parsing and validating as it went, basically. And that would let me import stuff. That code isn't working right now because, of course, they updated IMBA to a new version of the language that broke all of my existing code. So I'm going back and recoding everything. It's incredibly frustrating.
Could you send me information about it? The fact that it doesn't work is not actually that worrying from my PhD level. Of course, in reality it is, but if I could refer to what you've done, that would be really, really good.
Sure. I'll try to find the file later on and I can email you and show you what the grammar looks like.
Thank you.
And I mean, I know, well, apart from that, it shared the problem with ligatures, but as I said, I did rework my thesis for you with visual meta, and on my versioning list of to-dos actually is to basically re-render my document out of LaTeX with ligatures turned off, and then do the same, which would be a more useful document to play with, because the thing's published, so it's not, people do with what the journal like. No one's going to read it. But it's it's another thing we can play around with.
Yeah, that would be fun. So that's
fun weekend. My latest achievement is pulling in the link database from a hypertext, a Tinderbox file, and extracting the links from it. Then Tinderbox and the link database provides the offsets, and it also has the raw text of the note in the individual item. So I figured out how to extract the raw text version of the page, then apply the offsets from the link database so that I could augment the link database with the anchor text, which Tinderbox normally doesn't provide in the link database itself. So now I have that added. And I found a wonderful third-party library to generate Twitter-like previews of the links. So I applied that to all of the URLs from the link database. So now I also have all of the preview graphics ready to be rendered once I integrate it with the visuals for the web page. And this morning, I was going through quite maddening frustration of bringing in data from my Zotero bibliographic feed and my WordPress blog. And just for the record, I absolutely hate JavaScript promises and not being able to ever seem to get the data out of the promise to be a real regular value again. It's like fighting with monads and has you want to tear your hair out at times. But we'll get there eventually.
Burn him.
I'm just sticking some links in the sidebar, Peter, relating to what you just described.
Oh, great.
Also, as in terms of updates, I wasn't planning to, but I'm going to mention that anyway. On Friday, 2 o'clock, I'm scheduled to have an interview along with Vint Cerf for the BBC. And surprisingly, they want to talk about the software. They want to talk about Author, which, you know, considering we got in touch with them because of the launch of the book and Visual Meta, they said, no, we're kind of more, it's called Digital Planet. We're more, you know, user focused. So if there's anything useful for that, you know, don't keep it a secret. I'm getting
What do you mean?
well, I mean, I'm getting Jacob to do as many polishes as he can of Author to release on that day. There's so many little niggles. But again, we need to look at what we can do to extend these things and realize this stuff. So it's a marketing opportunity for the whole thing. Obviously, future of text will be mentioned somehow, but we'll see how it goes.
Very cool.
Is it a podcast or a show?
It's a radio on BBC World.
Oh, okay.
So the audience is huge.
That's awesome. Congrats.
Thank you. I don't know when it will be aired, but Vint and I are being interviewed on Friday. So when I met with the producer last Friday, we talked through these things and she said, this makes text come alive. That's how she views it. And she was really, really interested in the concepts, defined concepts and the map for that. I have to be careful not to call it concept mapping. Oh, here's Brandel. I'll just pause and repeat the last 10 seconds. Hello, Brandel. You came in just as I was mentioning the meeting I had with the BBC producer last week about interview with Vint on Friday, interview with me and Vint about the software. She really liked the defining concepts and mapping them out. She has a family member who is dyslexic. And she said, this is the kind of stuff that would massively help. That's something that I've heard from 2 of the expert interviewers as well, which is interesting. So just thought that's worth mentioning. And if anyone has any amazing ideas for something maybe I should bring up, plus Brandel, I also mentioned to everyone on Thursday, it's the last day I officially meet my academic advisors for my PhD, so I'm a bit stressed. Anyway, that's kind of from this side. Oh, also we've implemented a plugin for WordPress that allows you to copy as Bibtex, which can then be parsed as Visual Meta. That was Chris, who you met on Friday, who did that.
On that WordPress plugin, is that something that a WordPress blog author would have, or is that something that you could apply to someone else's WordPress site as a WordPress user?
It will initially be from the admin, but you know, we're going to kick it about a bit and see about the implementation, and then it would be nice to have it as a browser plugin as well.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I was thinking.
Yeah, but the problem is that different themes seem to present author name and title in different ways. So we're trying to find out what standards there really are to make sure that that's robust. So that's it from here. Anybody else have news or things you would like to talk about specifically?
Well, congratulations, first off, on launching the 2nd edition.
Yeah, thank you. That went well. There was an hour and a half panel with Vint and Ismail on Thursday at the Summit of the Book, where we discussed a lot of the issues and launched the book. So that was fun. I got a printed copy, and it's really weird because it's based on the output from author, of course. So the text is much bigger than the previous book, but it's designed to be read on screen, really, not on paper. So, you know, there it is.
Well, just tell people it's designed for old folks. So we've done it in really big print.
It's designed by old folks.
You mentioned, and apologies for not being here for some of these events, but you mentioned, I believe, a week or two ago that you needed some help with some formatting or some defining of entities. I'll have some time coming up at the later part of this month, so I'm happy to help if that's still an issue.
No, it's not, but we can restart thinking along those lines. That was really for the book. And we go through this often in the community, you know, how we're going to have like a community glossary and all of that stuff. It's still an infrastructure we need to look at. But at that stage, it was that. Going forward, we can look at, you know, we keep talking about how we're going to have the record for our own community, how the discussions that will start with having guest speakers in January. Maybe we want to invite those guest speakers to submit a few glossary entries or something like that. I don't know. What is your feeling on that, guys?
Are we still talking about doing a newsletter?
Yeah, but we have to define really what the newsletter is. Brendan took one of the transcripts, well, one of the recordings from one of our meetings, ran it through Otter, trained it on some of our voices, and it's got a really interesting and good result. But when you read the perfect transcripts, it's still, you know, writing and speaking is of course different. So I'm very grateful for that, and it definitely has to be part of the record. But we also, I think we agreed we need some sort of actually written content as well, of course. So the question is how that would then go together with the guest speaker and so on.
And that would also mean editing.
Yeah.
Well, if we do a writing component, it might be good to start compiling some backlog of material, things that could be used at any time, you know, if the timelines get tight. And then that might also be an opportunity to, I know one of the reasons that I didn't submit an article is because I don't have access to a good editor right now. And I feel like my work needs to be edited to see my own blind spots.
Talking about a human?
A lot. What's
a
that?
Human editor? Are you talking about a human editor?
Yeah, a human editor.
I'd be happy to read your stuff. Yeah, absolutely. That's one of the skill sets that I think I hold decently. And it's always good to just read what other people are thinking about. That's an open call to all of you. If you want to shoot things my way and have me try to
That'd
pick
be
them
wonderful.
apart.
Thank you, Brendan.
Yeah, absolutely.
Sorry, my brother was calling. What happened? Where are you? Yeah, that's wonderful. I mean, I'm practically dyslexic when it comes to reading my own work. So yeah, that'd be wonderful.
Yeah.
I got 100,000 words. And hang on, how many words now? My thesis, 47,000. Can you do it by Friday? Thank you.
Good there.
It makes an
hopefully
interesting...
after maybe after visual meta, we'll tackle the innate dyslexia. I know I have to even when I'm emailing a client, like just a sentence, I still have to reread it like several times over because I'll just skip keywords, like words that totally were in my head and they are not on the page.
Well, that's the difference between us. I may skip the words, but I don't reread it. It's just, it's like I might as well be writing fog, you know, to actually go back. It takes so much mental effort. So, and generally, yeah. But this really presents a question. You know, we have Adam and Brendel here, who currently represents 2D and 3D, just to be joking about you guys. You know, when we're talking about building an archive of our work or a library or a journal, what is the shape we want to think? Because I want to really consider things that can be hypertextual, i.e. smaller blocks. but how they're threaded together. That's the key thing we always look at, right? So Alan should be able to write a paragraph of something, put that into this thing, and we should be able to usefully read it. Isn't that the challenge?
Can you restate that?
In many books, there's a lot of fluff. Even articles, there's a lot of fluff. And if you, Alan, have a thought that you find interesting, if it goes into 12 pages, fantastic, that's fine. But if it really can be stated as a paragraph, where do you put it? You put it on a tweet and then a corporation owns it and it's lost in time. How can we, if we go back to early days of hypertext, allow you to write it on an index card, put it in a space where it is connected to other stuff? I know this is, of course, what Notion and Roam and these people talk about as well, backlinks and forward links and upside down links and all of that stuff. But just on a practical level, we're on a call. Let's say Adam has a thought about some interaction. He wants to share it with us. How can he put it somewhere and hook it so that then becomes part of the record that us or a new person can access? Isn't that part of our challenge?
Put it somewhere that is essentially the web, like where anybody can get to it? Or are you saying put it somewhere where they could see the document, the 12-page version?
I think that's the question for all of us. And, Brandel represents VR, full space. Adam represents kind of practical, it's on a web page. Rafael represents putting it well presented in cards and so on. We all have specific perspectives. So, for us to now make a journal, a newsletter, a whatever, we really need to decide what we mean by that thing. Otherwise, we're just filling another bucket with words.
There's an interesting point there in terms of, so you capture something, and so part of it then is also the bleed between capturing it in your own personal workspace, or if nothing else, in your local system, be that paper or electronic, and then actually being able to share that more widely, unless, of course, you write it in the wider system to start with.
I mean, I think blogs were a real stab at this. And I think that, if we wanted to start with blog infrastructure, including resurrecting RSS, we can get really far with something like this. They have nice mechanisms for tagging and stuff. What they don't have is nice mechanisms for reading connected work.
Just an aside about blogs. I've always hated them in an animalistic way, preternatural hatred, and I think I realized it's because of the reverse chronology, but then realized that one thing that's brilliant about blogs is that they decided on an arbitrary, it's like, I feel like there's a real clue here. To organize information, it has to be attached to something arbitrary, to the content. Otherwise, it'll be impossible to categorize and find later on. And so blogs' real invention was the very thing that I hate, the reverse chronology, saying where, the time is actually arbitrary to the meaning for the most part. If you're doing timely updates, then yes, there is a partial correlation to the time. But most blogs were totally arbitrary to the time that it was presented. But that creates this subtle catalog, a way to navigate it. So if there's something other than time, I think it still needs to be something that's arbitrary or apart from the content itself that can be present in any kind of post. Does that make sense? So to bring this to VR, there would be the question would be, could we make an arbitrary space, that in a way, it would be no improvement to the reverse chronology, which is too bad. But the interesting thing is that there would be an arbitrary marker. I can't even imagine how that would work, so I'm not going to try right now. I just want to make that note about blogs.
Does the reverse chronology sort of? Sorry, I spoke at Brandel. You go. Sorry. Oh, okay. Does it? Is it just you sense you can't find the thing you want because you've got to walk the timeline, or I mean, is it just a basic atavistic hate of the layout?
Yeah, my quick answer to that is that it was for me it was a context smasher. So I go to some new thinker that I'm enamored with, and I see their latest post, and to them they're completely embroiled in their way of thinking and the words that they use, and I'm only getting the tip of that spear. And it felt so unfair all the time and stupidly made, right? Like, and that's been addressed in a lot of times. You know, a lot of people now say like, "Hey, start here," you know. Then of course that start here is full of a lexicon of too much stuff. It would have been great to essentially have visual meta for the new user of the latest blog post, you know, where I could. Where perhaps even more things would be underlined than normal, and I could get the underlying concepts, which again, all of that technology was present, and we're not even really talking about new technology here. It's the etiquette, the way that it was used. I would have liked to have seen a whole lot more of that. I would like it to have been easier to embed all that context. Anyway, go ahead, whoever else.
Brendel.
Let's see.
Yeah, I agree with the difficulty, Alan, with the reverse chronological order, and it's something I was playing with when I first started setting up a web presence. I had a wiki that I was going to use in much essentially the same way as Rome turned out to kind of run, where you would have actually categories for a large number of things rather than article content. One of the issues with that is that there's very little implied chronology of content, you know, in terms of what is next, and that's one of the challenges that a Xanadu experience has, is that it's for navigation and not for consumption, not for reading. And all of these different sort of innovations, wikis and blogs, and a couple other kind of online things, even documents, are on a continuum, and that's one of the things that Google Wave kind of recognized with their idea of trying to make things being naturally hypertextual. But the issue is, I think you hit the nail on the head, is that there's this tension between what you think about while you're creating versus what you think about what you're reading and how you're consuming it. And from the perspective of somebody who is writing a WordPress blog, it makes perfect sense, top of mind, to have the most recent things near the top where you're writing them. And for people who are engaged and involved in a blog, it also makes enough sense if you're sort of following the flow of it. I think, yeah, when you're writing something and you put it into a wiki or a Rome like, then it makes sense. But the linkage is the challenge. One of the solutions is an imperfect one, is a tag cloud, something automatically generated or manually done, where you make sure that you identify what the themes are. But I don't know that anybody's assembled that into something beyond just that disordered tag cloud. That could be an interesting sort of solution or like assistance, is where you have where you spend a little bit more time on that curation based on the selection of elements that are present within sort of an automatically generated collection of concepts to be able to create something that's maybe closer to prose, that actually tells you which things are there and what time they were in, and that kind of sort of selection subset of the overall corpus. But yeah, something to play with.
Love it.
Peter.
Yeah, we might be able to leverage the WordNet ontology to help with that. One thing, like with tag clouds, you might have a whole bunch of terms that have a relatively low ranking in the time cloud, but they might all in the tag cloud, but they might all belong to the same synset or category of terms. So you'd want some way to be able to reify that and aggregate them together to indicate that the concept is prominent, even though the concept is described with a large number of different low frequency descriptors. Also, I put in the sidebar a couple of links to a fascinating visualization. I just stumbled onto it last night. I was watching a travel log and they were doing a visit to London, and they showed a 15-meter long interactive timeline representing the life of Winston Churchill down in the Churchill war rooms. So there's one link to a video showing the actual visualization in use and a small article talking about it.
Yeah, I had a look at that. So I can't get, I was trying to get Chris's kind of a space up from Friday, but yeah, Mark.
Yeah, I just meeting a thing on blog. One other aspect I find is that, you know, it's really hard writing for other people. I mean, you might write your blog and categorize it effectively, maybe for a class you're teaching. Writing it for any visitor who might come, because I find one of the problems with blogs is you go there about something really interesting, and then you find actually it's full of kitten pictures and, you know, insert thing you really like or thing you really hate, and that wasn't what you came for. And often because we're writing for ourselves, we say, oh, this is obviously about future of text, and I'll put a tag in, and how hard can it be, and people will sort it out. And actually, I mean, I think if I was trying to write about subjects, it's useful to have a better way, whether you had, you know, a number of sub blogs, which I've seen some people do, but I'm certainly unimpressed by the current sort of approach of just tagging and assuming that, well, basically what it basically assumes is somebody else will sort out all the difficult stuff. I'll just put in some metadata and it'll somehow sort itself out. And I think the experience is that it doesn't. I work to do.
Yeah, Alan.
Oh, yeah, just going back to the tag cloud that Brandel mentioned, you know, that, and in keeping with the theme of using Mondays to talk about interfaces, it makes me wonder if we went back to a time before blogs, and the default was a tag cloud, or in these days it would be a graph, right? So imagine those being the same thing. So just in the sense of where today we default to thinking a graph needs to be an entire knowledge base represented, it wouldn't be that. It could be, here's a graph of, you know, the top items, right? And then sort of like with author, and perhaps even, so step one, you have the cloud / graph. Step two, you have the spectrums where you can kind of choose what you want to be on that graph, you know, like show me more of this or less of that, or perhaps the, you know, the most popular versus what has to do with technology, you know, and they kind of like auto sort into block-ish regions without the blocks being there. Then you use your mouse to select the tags that you're interested in reading about, and then they pop up as text, as articles on the right. It's that reverse graph idea that we mentioned before, that Adam, you built that wonderful representation of dragging text over to a canvas to make a graph. This would be the opposite of that, where you have the kind of graph and you're essentially selecting or grabbing to then say, show me the text about this. So you could, with the, and all that brings up is the main problem with, well, one of the main problems with tag clouds is that you click on it and then you go to a page about that one tag, right? So you would completely lose your context. And it was never worked on that middle space, you know? So it'd be interesting to see what that looked like. That's it.
I think your word context there is kind of the beginning of what I want to say. Things like this is very different if you do it as a community and if you just post something by yourself, right? And we are a defined community, so that makes a difference. So I could easily imagine having an authoring environment where I write my thing, and then maybe it's always visible, maybe through interaction, I can see a couple of things. I can see, let's say, the last 20 posts by you guys. And if they're relevant, I just drag them in. So that's how I tag it, right? Somehow relevant to that. Maybe I even see your tags. And then I have the people in the community. I can select all or one or two and drag it in and say, also, I'm relating this to you guys. So that I don't just write into a white space a tag of nothing. You know, it is literally dots on the screen, main body, things can be pulled in so that you keep contextualizing it. Maybe even imagine if we have a journal and I can take my thing, collapse it and drag it to next month's journal. So it's there and it is, let's say, queued, and the rest of the people in the community can choose to veto it by saying, are you sure? And if not, depending on preferences for the community, it goes to the next journal entry. You know, things like this. I mean, I don't think you saw this, Randall. This doesn't work properly on my setup here, but this is something my friend and colleague Chris Gutteridge made on the proper URL. This one is a bit broken. You can paste in even a video and it'll play it in line, collapse things, expand things. But the really nice thing he had was how you could, if you had a list of stuff like content on a page, you drag it out, it would show you that it's no longer on that list. It would be grayed out. So it gave a bit of almost physicality to it. So this kind of stuff we can easily, as a community, invent, you know, in terms of mock-up, right? It's not that hard. But, you know, I have the bias towards documents. So if I was going to be part of this, I would want us to have, let's say, a monthly dump into PDF with visual meta that everybody gets an email. I really don't mind having a web interaction being the primary place. You know, I don't think it's an either or thing, right? And considering what Adam has showed us on web browsers recently, can be amazing. And of course, Brandel can easily explode this into a much richer interaction once we put something on our heads. But all I'm saying is that give the user an environment to author where they can really, really easily contextualize their work based on previous work in that group. And the second half of that is give the reader exactly the same opportunity. So while they're reading it, they should be able to say, I don't want to see anything by Adam for now, because he's talking about a specific thing. I know that stuff. But, oh, Brandel is relatively new. I want to see everything by him. This kind of, even if it's click on a name, control click and choose show everything, and all of those options, hierarchical options, can give us a world of opportunities over. I think maybe Rafael next, because you haven't spoken yet. And then Alan.
So can you guys hear me okay? I'm having some difficulties. Okay. So just quick update overall. You know, I'm in a different space. I'm in a Japanese farm in the middle of nowhere, and the connection here is sometimes is weird, and I'm still getting everything set up. So sometimes I'm able to participate, sometimes not, especially at the end of the year. We're going to have, every year they have a theater play. So I've been doing a lot of work with audio, video, and basically, you know, producing. So it's been long days, Monday through Monday, but learning a whole lot, and it connects with this because on the matters of content and blog, it's something that we deal with as me, you know, as the software, as the app, because it's always thinking of how do we organize information and how do we present that information to people. And if you follow content from the beginning, if you think about it in terms of software, for example, let's say a software just released and you're using it since day one, you grow up with the software. So once new things come out, it's not learning everything that came before. It's just updating that little bit of information. And following blogs is the same thing. If you follow somebody since the first post, you always have the context of what he's talking about, where he's coming from and all those things. But it always becomes an issue once you try to onboard yourself in content that has been being published for, I don't know, for 2 years or something. So how do you onboard or present the content to somebody that just arrived and you've been here for a couple of years already? I don't have the answer for that yet, but it's something that we're trying, to do using filters, like Frode was just mentioning. If I want to see everything by this person or that person or this content type, you should be able to. But it's also a matter, I think you guys are also talking about, I can just dump my information there, or I have to invest some time organizing the content. I can either have it automatically, by publish date, or I could have it manually by this comes before this, because even though it was published later, because it helps give more context to the next bit of information. So we see it as a way of starting on the automatic and then giving users control to restructure bits and pieces to give more context to people, right? And here in the community, there's a lot of new equipment, and basically a lot of documentation has to be written. So I'm organizing all of this information and putting it in a way that anybody could use. Like if you want to record an interview, what are the equipments you need? What's the setup you need? How do you organize these things? And this has to be in Portuguese and Japanese, and it has to be simple because people are not technically, technical natives here. So there's a lot of challenges, and I think it always, it's all kind of connected. So I'm not gonna be here forever. So once I'm not here, if somebody new comes that hasn't followed along the process of onboarding with this new equipment, how will they learn? So that's where the documentation and the onboarding process comes in, and it connects with a blog perspective of writing content for the future. And that's what I have to say.
Well, I don't take the last thing first, because I was interested in that closing thing of Rafael was saying. That's so close to sort of what I've been thinking about with organizational information, because the organization is there and rolls on, but its institutional knowledge is normally walking around in people's brains and very rarely captured, partly because of the way we go about it, because we don't approach it as something that's continuing, and we constantly stumble over this very thing that Rafael's sort of mentioned, which is sort of, if you're new to the stream, how do you learn what out of that vast corpus do you actually need to know, and what of the rest is just interesting history for those who were around at the time and may or may not ever be pertinent, or indeed more than just history. A couple of things that that I put my hand up to just say in passing, so looping back slightly, again, about thinking of tag clouds. I don't know if anyone here has actually used a tag cloud to look at their own work, because I sort of find they're confusing enough when I look at people's tags as a user, as a consumer of it, to try and figure out what it is. And I must say it's an exercise I haven't done and probably should do, but my gut feeling is it's probably as confusing for the creator as it is for the reader, which might just say that folksonomy sort of tag clouds aren't all they're cracked up to be. And the other, just another passing note about Weblo, because that Fred was showing us earlier, which is super, and in fact something I wanted for a long time, and again I was around in some conversations that led up to that. I wanted it for a slightly different reason, but that's by the by. But I do recall this fact about what you can just do. I mean, Chris is a very clever guy, but the idea that you can just make this, I think, is slightly stretching the metaphor. The amount of sort of setting up a mise en place needed is actually non-trivial for 99% of people, and that's something to bear very much in mind when looking at these things, because they're really hard to scale out to people if you just need your own server, and no, you need a bit of React, and you'll need this, and then suddenly you've got this alphabet soup of stuff. which for most people, if they're lucky, they might understand what it is. The chance of being able to do it themselves, certainly do it in a useful and working fashion, is probably quite low. And it's a shame, because what it means is the really useful idea that's nestling at the end of that doesn't get fruition. So another useful aspect here is to think about ways to ensure that if these are really good ideas, to nurture them out so that they are accessible to a wider audience.
Yeah, I find a strong tension in what tooling I want to use for this purpose. As far as putting content up fast and painlessly, I have my WordPress blog, or I'll use Zotero to push out a citation, but neither of those tools really works for the rich kind of linking and structuring that I want to do. And in that side, I want to be using Tinderbox. So then my problem is, where should the stuff live? Should my blog feeds be living in WordPress, or should I bring them in to Tinderbox? Now, if I work with them primarily in Tinderbox, then I'm looking at having to render out the Tinderbox file, pre-process it, and generate a new version of the JavaScript website to upload onto the server. So it's a multi-step process. It works for major updates, but for something where I want to be adding just short little chunks on a daily basis, it doesn't work that well currently because of all that overhead in terms of pushing it out. Now, I could have Tinderbox just generate a data file representing the website, and that's currently where I'm at now, sort of like an in-between mode where the web pages that are going to be generated with Imba will be pulling in the data file from Tinderbox, massaging it and turning that into a website for me. So that side of it, I don't have to touch. And then I'm only touching the Tinderbox file for building the link structures. But for short, quick, and dirty posts, WordPress is a much easier environment because there's no uploading to the server. You're talking to the server and adding the data on that end. So what we really need is something that has sort of like a headless CMS living on the server that we could talk to through whichever kind of tooling we want to be using with, so we could have one source of the information instead of having these three divergent feeds of the bibliographic database, the blog database, and the richly linked WordPress representation of the site. The richly linked Tinderbox representation of the site. So I'm not quite sure how to balance it, but those are sort of the problems that I've been grappling with most of late.
Alan.
Yes. I'm going to try something a little goofy here and present a kind of a comic that I just wrote or drew to go to the idea. But first, to touch back on what Mark was saying and kind of the theme here is, that I see all the way back to Ted Nelson and earlier, is that a visionary comes up with a great big idea and shows the basic steps, right? And then the implementers tend to do a sort of a objects are closer than they appear kind of approach and do a direct translation of this visionary idea. And so then we get tools that are intriguing but don't really work, like tag clouds. And I think that's because there might be an idea inside of tag clouds that's actually very useful, but because it was treated directly as the invention, the object is closer than they appear, it's pointless. So a way to give you an example of how tag cloud / graphs might work with an emphasis on what are those missing steps would look something like, let's see, I got to see my screen. I can't see myself. There we go. Okay, so you see here, stand up. You've got step one, hopefully you can see that, which is a
a random graph that's visualized in whatever way. Some things have a greater radius and bleed into others. Some things are harsh boundaries. Some are connected and not. Fun ways to visualize that, and perhaps even to Mark's point, a way to synonymize or have synonyms available for any of these statements, so you're not locked into the way one person presents something, right? Whatever. Then step 2 is the user kind of selects in whatever way, lasso-like way, multi-select. Here it's just like dragging a selection boundary of saying, I'm interested in these things, right? Now, normally what would happen next is that would mean, show me the articles where these are involved. And that's exactly where I think things go wrong. So the next step is the system internally has, in this case, 3 narrative paths. There might be 30, who knows? And these paths go like, I start here and I go down here and I touch these points, right? Path 2 or path B has a lot of points, and C has, very few. And this selection is not show me all the posts. The selection set is saying, tell me where to start, right? So I'm interested in these and I want to know which one to start. So now the service says, okay, of those selections, which I read is these 4, this one is the closest, which I can't read it from now, but you get the idea, and it picks a path. And then you get to read as well as seeing how they relate to what you've clicked on and sort of like where they fire, right? And that's just a small random example, but there are a couple of steps in there that are themselves, I don't know, I think it would make things easier. So I present that to the group.
I think that's very interesting. And I think an interesting addition to that type of working might be that, we have an intro page in this community on VR, to take the topic. That's kind of, we've decided that's one of them. So let's say Adam writes a piece on VR and he attaches it to that. So now under that, or wherever, literally attached this is Adam's bit on VR. And then in a few months later, Adam writes another piece. Actually, no, this one. And then he just replaces it with another bit. Well, literally drag and drop in an amazing workspace so that we can all in the community choose to have our main comment for that. And our main comment for that may very well be links to other things that we've said. But that means that we agree on a few entry points. We have VR, maybe human factors, a few things that we as community think are the leading things, but we can only have one top pinned personal reference to that. But something Peter talked about earlier that reminded me of what I thought was an insight today that I put on my thesis is, so we had a little Christmas party here on Saturday. And there was one of the sets of people here was one of Edgar's friends and his parents. And I just realized that it really teaches hypocrisy, because I noted, Emily is a very involved, loving, caring mother. But if I see another mother who is more involved with her, then she's just being a helicopter mom and it's too much. And if I see a mom who's slightly less involved, then that's just a cold mother, right? And it's like when you're driving, somebody who's driving faster than you is being reckless. Somebody who's driving slower than you is in the way, right? So it just shows the continuum that we are on. And it goes back to man is the measure of all things, right? I think that really fits in what we're dealing with here, because Alan, you asked a few meetings ago about some of the design philosophy behind my software. And one of the things is this: to me, anybody who is less competent using a Mac than me is just naive and a bit wasting time. Why couldn't they be bothered to learn? Anybody who is more advanced than me is basically a programmer, right? We all
I love it.
Right? We all put ourselves in the center, right? We're all, it's like, well, how sweet do you want your coffee? Medium. What does that mean? Right? We all think we're the medium, pretty much. So in practical terms, designing author, I tried to stick to as many conventions as possible. I expect people to know the basics. So if you can do Command T, you Command D for define. It shouldn't take you that long. That's my perspective. I may be wrong. That's what we're trying to find out. But in terms of the effort Peter was talking about, the different kinds of postings, I really think it should be relatively easy for us to post anything we're slightly serious about. But we should also be able to reach in and do lots of rigging behind the scenes to make sure it really fits where we want, if we want to expend the effort.
Well, you've really hit the nail on the head there. I'll wait my turn.
Yeah, thanks, Peter.
Yeah, speaking about Mac users, one of the problems that we have is that more and more of our projects are becoming dependent on command line tools and utilities, and not everyone has the same command line setup. For instance, Tinderbox doesn't use the same shell that I use. So if I ask Tinderbox to execute a shell command, it's not seeing the same set of shell commands installed in my system that my default fish shell is seeing. So there, I think that the Linux people might have an edge with their concept of different distros, where someone will come through and cherry pick what utilities they think work optimally together, and then bundle that all together in a manner that someone else could install it. And if we had something like that in the Mac world, where we as a community could agree, okay, here are the 3 programming language implementations that we're going to be building our stuff on, and here's one simple installer script that an average Mac user who isn't a programmer could run on his Mac, that would then go and reach out to the different websites in series and basically walk and handhold them through the process of setting up the same base desktop configuration that we're using on our systems, so that when we go referring to a wget utility or something, it will actually be installed on that person's system without their having to be consciously thinking about it. So just basically a simple cookbook recipe. Here's how you set up a new Mac to have a desktop that supports the utilities that our community is building our stuff on top of, so that we could get everybody up to the same baseline. And then when we use the command line to leverage an app like Author or Tinderbox or something, it would find a consistent environment and not simply, command not found. I actually had a Tinderbox script that was going to be using a ZTime command line utility that was going to be giving me a Zulu time, and I wanted to pre-populate all of the attributes with the Zulu time index for when those particular notes were created. And it worked beautifully at first. And then I tried running that command through Tinderbox. Tinderbox couldn't see the Zulu time command, and it populated every attribute with command not found.
We're going a little bit really deep into the weeds when we're going into time codes on Tinderbox. If that's okay, if you can pull back out a little bit for your point.
Yeah, so basically the point is that the desktop environments have different configurations, and we need an easy way for non-technical people to auto set up a similar configuration so that other stuff will work instead of breaking.
Yeah, that makes sense. Mark, I think you're next here.
Yeah, I just actually sort of linking it in 2 things. I really liked Alan's sketch there. That very much speaks to sort of how I sort of think about these sort of, or how I'd like to be dealing with these sort of things. But and then Fred, you mentioned this idea of this idea of having to have some top level articles and things, which I totally get. But then I'm thinking, but I can't let go of the fact that I know if it's me, I'm going to be putting something that's going to sit between 2 tags that either belongs equally in 2 or in neither, but connects them. So I sort of find this is another problem with this sort of tags and hierarchies work really well for us because we know how to deal with them. We know where everything goes. And often the sort of the ideas and the associations, the concepts are a bit more of a soup, which is nice when we can have these loose graphs, because we're basically we're trying to reduce premature formalization, I guess. And the more that we can hold that at bay until we know, what particular thing we want to pull the trigger on and pull out as a structured thing, I think that's to the better. And I'm not claiming to have an answer there. And I'm not trying to just be disruptive and say, oh, but none of these things work. But I do think that's this idea of keeping this looseness as long as we can is actually really useful in this area.
Yeah.
I'm also going to have to go. I have some scheduled things to do, but it's nice to jump in. And I definitely want to continue that conversation with Alan and you guys related to, content, blogs and things, because that's right up where I have to study more and find ways to solve that.
I love what you're doing too, Rafael. That sounds amazing. I hope to hear more about it. Like, it's so cool that you're doing that.
It's going to be on YouTube. Every year they do dancing, theater, and music. It's a community of artists. They've been here for 85 years. So the live stream is going to be on YouTube. Last year I helped them out, but it was recorded on iPad, so the quality isn't that great. But we'll have a nice video to show by the end of the year. It's going to be nice.
Excellent.
That's awesome.
Yeah. Okay, so it's also leaving, I see.
Yep.
I wanted to just add something at the end then.
I have a few more minutes. Some of us will be here. No big rush, but just to make sure Rafael and Peter. See
you all on Friday. Bye.
Bye.
Yeah, bye guys. See you Friday.
Bye.
I'll just add that I think you really hit the nail on the head. Oh, sorry, Adam, go ahead. My bad.
I wonder what the underlying substrate for everything here is, because we have to put the hypertext somewhere in a kind of a format to what is a substrate for the Docuverse, because we have the idea of having two-dimensional spaces or three-dimensional spaces, or documents not living in a space, but rather being hypertext, just linked, connected, but not spatially. So there has to be some sort of substrate for it to live in, files or databases or graphs that is represented in some way. I wonder how to represent those hyperlinked documents or positioned documents or fragments together in something that is a bit more expressive than PDF, that would accept multiple views, but also accept multimedia, to bundle a bit more animated GIFs or videos and so on. So the substrate which could accept everything we've been discussing here.
I think that can come later, because I think that one of the magical things about the digital environment, it doesn't have to be one substrate, but it needs to know how to refer to itself and to others. So I don't see anything in principle being wrong having a local database to run it really fast, as well as having a backup on PDFs with visual meta, obviously, and having it online in a WordPress form. But as long as everything is identified as units plus subunits with addressability, I think most of this problem is an issue of addressability. You should be able to choose to say, I want this view, and because this is the data available to me, I'm going to use this. So we don't even have to think about caching anymore. We just have to think about distributing what is relevant. And in other words, what I'm trying to do before Alan speaks now is just kick this down the road a little bit. I think we need to allow ourselves to be magical thinkers for a little bit, and then figure out the appropriate substrate afterwards. And that's just my thoughts.
Yeah, I would argue the opposite here, that we must approach this from the two opposite end of user interfaces on one hand, and the actual underlying, what I call the substrate or the format. These are the two endpoints that can't that are hardest to nail and the hardest to change afterwards, especially formats. you're a big proponent of PDF because it's stable, and the reason why it's stable is because it's
Shit.
yeah. No, yeah, well, but good enough for the purposes of creating page documents, and it's agreed upon. So if we're going to do the better PDF, it would take lots of effort actually designing the format, and I think the format is the most important part here on the tech side. Not the software, because the software can and always will be changing, but the formats are the most crucial parts that are hardest to change after the fact. You know, with visual meta, you already now have a few conflicting versions, and if you invent a better one, everything you've done so far will be either thrown away or a software nightmare to support everything. So it is the hardest problem, and it's really important to
it is the hardest problem. And what I really think is important is to, like earlier, both at the same time. You just said it. I completely agree with you.
Yeah, but a moment ago you said the opposite, to think interfaces first and then cemented.
Yes, but I think it is obviously the tension of going back and forth is important, but I think we need to basically get high and relax and talk Californian, right? I've had weed twice in my life, so I'm not exactly a drug pusher, but just in terms of just let go and just think what can magically happen. Because one thing that happened over this weekend on a very practical level is that the visual meta from WordPress is actually not visual meta at all. We had to remove the visual meta tags. It's just Bibtex. So that was an example of, we dreamt of a thing to happen, and turned out it was the most prosaic way we could make it happen. So there's no question that, Adam, you're dead right. There's no question. I just think also, with the fear of talking about Harry Potter, because the author is a bit of a funny woman, having magical paper, magical spaces, magical environments, literally just doodling in the wall and suddenly it's connected to the universe. I just think we need a little bit of that, but maybe we should set aside specific sessions for that kind of blue sky thinking. That's all.
The reason why I'm pushing for this is that whenever I do a prototype, after that I think, okay, so now how do I save this so I can send it around, the actual creation, a work I do in my prototype.
Okay, let's park that for a few minutes, because that's a really good point. And then Alan can get his yellow hand done.
Okay. So first off, I think I can bridge the gap a little bit there, because Adam, I definitely identify with where you're coming from, and was actually writing about this for the future of text, something similar. There is a need to handle it from both sides, because on one side you have to blue sky think and figure out what is it that we're actually doing all of this for, and on the other side you have to say, well, what are the actual physical constraints, and this is where most of the misfit occurs. So a perfect example would be a speedometer versus an Apple Watch, right? A speedometer is an exact correlation to the speed that a car is going. Now, that's great information. There's some evidence that suggests that driving is so intuitive, or becomes so intuitive, that a speedometer actually makes you drive worse, right? So if the goal of the speedometer were to actually try and make driving safer, one can make an argument that the technological implementation of a speedometer is doing the opposite of its role, but it at least is an exact correlation, as opposed to an Apple Watch, where it's just making guesses of how much you've stood or slept or walked. And at the same time, we still try and close our rings, which is just making the watch happy and has very little to do with how much we've actually moved in a given day, right? So but for the watch, it is bound by the constraints. It can't do anything more. You know what I mean? The want is for it to actually understand how much you moved around, but the technology is not there, right? So they went ahead and did it, right? But it was bound by technology. It still is bound by technology. So it's very valuable to take it from the approach that you're taking,
to jump back to the highfalutin for a moment, for what you mentioned about the helicopter mom spectrum is brilliant. And I think that if anything, when I think about the future of text, it is right within that conflict space. And I'll give you an example as to why. Even writing the one pinned comment that you mentioned, right? It can be exceedingly difficult, because if there is one thing that we're responsible for as thinkers, it is to not contradict ourselves, right?
Or
we are trying to
contradict ourselves.
Correct. But when you are talking about something that's open-ended and speculative, first off, that is difficult to not contradict yourself. And when you're trying to address an audience that is completely non-convex, it is difficult to not contradict yourself, right? So there's two dimensions of difficulty there. And that can be seen in, imagine the problem that you just presented, and imagine if it was solved. You go back to Socrates, and you got a guy here who, throughout his works, or the presentation of his works, contradicts himself all over the place. Based on how charitable the reader is, they can find contradictions, or they can find a through line of logic. Versus like Hegel, who writes so much just in the effort to not contradict himself, that maybe only 1% of it was actually needed if he was talking to someone who is empathetic to his mentality. So if there was a way to get past that spectrum that you're talking about, imagine how different literature would be today.
Yeah, I mean, yes, I'm going to address Brandel's point there, but I remember when I was working in Silicon Valley at CKS and doing what I thought was the most obvious thing on the computer, Photoshop or whatever, and then have clients come in and ask us to change things like, this is so ridiculous, why don't you do it at home? Right, that goes a little bit to that. I don't know why I thought of it, but actually the way it relates is the depth of understanding in a specific issue. Because I happen to know those things, to me, they were nothing, right? But like Adam doing the stuff that we see on the screen, and I go, wow, that's magic. You know, there's that block. This block is also in our community. I think that's partly what you're saying, Alan, that, you know, a lot to think about text is really darn hard, because the unknowns are so unknown, and it takes so much digging and dialogue with us to even notice that there are questions. So yes, I see what you're saying. What Brandel is saying, I think it's all three, to answer the question in a boring way. But more interestingly, what I really want to develop, and Brandel, you've liberated me to think VR, even though I haven't taken my old Sony headset down or anything like that. But in this conversation, I would really like to just, you know, we have a magical floaty space. Let's be very naive about VR for a minute. Obviously, Brandel, that'll be difficult for you because you know so much, but let's pretend. I would really like to take output tool, put it here, information resource here, community here, and save that space as Frode Hegland's introduction to this community, right? And then we can each have an introduction. And these three topics will be something that, you know, maybe you all agree and we somehow say, oh yeah, that's cool. So it becomes our shared introduction. Someone who enters our space, and of course, this could be rendered in a blog. It could be rendered in a PDF. It could be rendered in VR. So what I'm kind of going back with you, Adam, is that different media affords different interactions. So your question is crucial. How do we store this stuff? Absolutely core. But it's also a question of how are we going to allow these media to access it? I mean, you know, the Apple Watch, to bring that up again, has a complete web browser, for crying out loud. That's just lunacy, right? It's an amazing tech, but it's not practical. You can't do the same space. But I can imagine that, anyway, let's not go down that route. But the point is, I think we should almost decide on an arbitrary core place. And I actually suggest WordPress. A lot of stuff can be squeezed into a blog. And if we do something like visual meta at the bottom of a blog post, fully visible, that has a lot of these data bits in it, that could be very, very useful. And from that, it shouldn't be so hard to do these monthly exports into our journal or something. And, you know, Brandel can experiment in his world, taking it into VR. Adam, you can read and write to it in the same way. And then we get into the argument over your layout system, Adam, and Brandel's layout system. One is 2D, one is 3D. You have different things. That will be a hugely useful discussion. Over.
I have to leave. Sorry. Bye. Sorry. I do want to keep listening, but I'll...
Okay, fading away one by one. One thought about that is interesting. Well, one of the things that sort of made me realize, well, A, is I think I'm a bit of a Hegelian writer. I'm definitely prompted to sort of hedge about in an attempt to find meaning. But what prompted me to speak was also thinking that it's interesting seeing a presentation, because for some people, the sort of this visual, you know, this wonderful thinking space that you've just described is the means to get to the text at the end. And I'm definitely the reverse sort of person. Actually, the text is what gets in the way. What I really, really want is the fancy thing. That's where all the thinking to me happens, where all the interesting thought and knowledge creation happens. Because normally I'll have read, in some other context, I'll have read the bits I need to, or I'll go away and do that. But where they begin to jump up and sort of dance and show stuff is when we have these sort of unstructured views, where the one thing we're trying to do is not coerce the sources or the causal factors or whatever you want to call them to a particular picture. So I think I'm singing to the same tune, but I think I think I'm articulating just an excitement with it, but B, a different different perspective on it.
You know what I think we should do, guys? I think we should decide on an evening. We all go and watch the new Matrix movie, and we have a meeting afterwards.
Is there a new Matrix?
Oh, yes, yes, there is. You know, something to in our heads a bit, and then, you know, like plan it to be right before we have a special session on, because in there, you know, they ignore all kinds of realities, and it's quite liberating, right? Mm. Especially the kind of freedom you're talking about, Mark, not being tied down to, you know, putting things in a place, and that means that they mean that.
Well, it's hard to describe, but I mean, I know that. I mean, I know I know by the sort of the blaze that arise thereby that, you know, I'm not a particularly linear thinker, and also that broad picture thinking, for want of a better term, is not a normative human trait. In fact, for most people, it makes them very, very uncomfortable, and they will pull away from it. So, I mean, one of the, you know, a mistake I made in my youth was not realize that fact because no one told me otherwise. Yeah. And then I realized a lot of difficult interactions because effectively I was giving people a bigger picture than they wanted to deal with. And they were constantly trying to close it down. And I was getting confused and opening it up again. But sometimes, and it's not a sort of zero-sum game. It's not the one is better than the other. I think what I have learned though is some problems are much better solved by being open to the idea of looking at a wider space. And this is where it's really, this plays back to the things that we were talking about when Adam was doing some sort of simulations earlier, in this idea of saliency and dialing stuff back. You don't want to get rid of it. You actually want it there. You just don't want, you know, hitherto our systems have tended to just give us everything. If we want more, they give us all of it, which wasn't what we asked for. What we wanted was a degree of subtlety. So these things are closer to me, or these things are more important.
Let me ask you a very practical question. I'm just looking at that link. Yeah, Brandel and Adam asking you the same question. Let's say you were suddenly forced through some kind of information emergency to develop a system in your own preferred ways of working, but it has to instantly be available in the other person's. Obviously, that would have to have some kind of a database engine, at least to work with the synchronization. Would you want to do that? Would you be able to do it? Or is it completely unfeasible and you wouldn't even be interested?
Speaking personally, I'm not actually wedded to virtual reality or necessarily even 3D space. The thing that I think is interesting about it is the way that it sort of adds the possibility for a greater subtlety and intricacy of manipulation with multi degree of freedom sort of inputs, as well as the concept of real estate. You know, the sort of thing that you can do with more space is different to the stuff that you can do with less. And so VR is simply an easy way of doing that rather than having to have a great big monitor or a table that you can project stuff on. So a lot of the stuff that I've done in the past has been in 2D. One of the things that I like is the consequence of the combination of those things. One of the reason why I mentioned so yes, I would have no objection to being able to consume something. And my answer to Adam's question with regard to like what do we store, how do we store it is we store all of the pertinent details that we need for the display of those things. We maybe need to understand it with regard in the context of something like a database relational schema, or we use some other system that allows us to be able to be aware of what kind of constraints and shape the data needs to have in order to be displayed. And it fundamentally comes down to what do we want to display and what are the relevant and pertinent components of that. One of the reasons why I reference Lada Adamek's course, that's the thing that I mentioned a few weeks ago, talking about PageRank. I remember the name of it is Eigenvector Centrality Analysis. And if you're not into social network analysis, that's probably a little bit arcane, but it's the idea of like, where's the middle of the network with regard to not necessarily where the edges, like where's the periphery of it, but like where are the centralist nodes with regard to who links to what and for what reason, and based on the sort of the propagation of who links to what and for what reason several times over, what are the middleist nodes. And the interesting thing about that is not necessarily that, but the perspective that it takes to be able to kind of form a view of a network like that, I think is fascinating, because it means that is what people who build PageRank look at pages like. And to Mark's point, they have the capacity, not just critically, but also technically, to take this incredibly big picture view. But the dimensional reduction, go ahead. Oh, you're going somewhere. Okay. But the dimensional reduction that they do in terms of presenting a Google search result is immense. That none of they don't show any of their working. And yet for many people, the things that they show are still, there's too much dimensionality to it. To have a single linearized ordered list of it, it is to many people overwhelming, because there's like, what, there are 2 million results. Like, well, there are, but the way in which they are relevant to you is multidimensional. And if you could see those in a space, if you could understand the way in which that determination was made, then maybe that number would be a little bit more amazing or less amazing, depending on how you understand the consequences. So yeah, I think having some capacity to figure out a way to allow people to see that working and interact with it a little bit more nuance than just clicking a button on a page, I think is a great start for giving them a sense of slightly better appreciation for what information retrieval is. And I don't know. I think that's a useful step toward building a tool like this, is building the tool for the retrieval as well.
I like that analogy of the sort of centrality thing, because to a certain extent, the added part here is, whereas obviously if you're using something like a social network, you know, in a sense, the entities really are people. But if it's just ideas, actually the center of sort of gravity may actually lie in a null space between things. But it's only by, you know, in other words, it's only by looking at all the factors you realize the really center of it is basically an unknown at this point, somewhere in this place that doesn't have anything, is how it feels to me. So there's always a tension there when trying to do structuring, because to a certain extent, if I build a structure, the one thing I'm inherently doing is removing my ability to put things where I think I might need to put them later.
I'm showing this screenshot because I think it's relevant to what you're saying. And yeah, Brendan, I heard what you said when I was off screen. And I think I understood it, but it's probably going to take some repeating. But so this is a page from my thesis, and it is the framework. It's basically the overview of what I did. So there's 3 columns. The academic research going down here is I did background research, scoping study, blah, blah, blah. That's all explained in the body text. This is apparently how you're supposed to do it, as in, have a graph and explain it. So what I've done, I've made in Author that when I have an internal link, it takes the font of the heading, because you can only link to headings. That's the way it works now. You can't link to an arbitrary location. So that makes it a bit easier to understand that expected affordances of the links. Some of these don't even work yet, so that's a practical issue. But the crazy thing is, I cannot, with any ordinarily available tool now, turn this into an image map. And that's obviously an absurdity. So, when I have background here, that's supposed to be a link and it's the same thing as here, but why can I not click here, right? So I'm showing this as a really, really basic example of what I think we're talking about. All of us should be able to author and present it like this, but also in much richer ways. But the interaction should be, this is how I present my world. And this is how we could all represent our world of this community. We could have a little graph that is our personal view. We could say, these are the people I really think are important to follow. I think these tags are actually relevant at the moment. And over here, I could say, these are the top articles that I have starred. Just make that available, or whatever it might be. So you could read it in this flat way, still clickable, or it can be fully interactive in the kind of environments we're talking about.
Because I suppose, well, I know it's the end of this week, this thing's going in, but as you were showing me that diagram, I think, well, if it was an SVG, surely you could embed links into it. And it's scalable, so it embiggens, when you put it on your wall size display or something. It's not just some pixels this big.
Yeah, it could be done, but I don't have the tool capability to make.
No, I agree. It's not.
No.
Easy.
I'm
It ought
just
to be easy.
Doug had this in 1968. Clickable image maps. I'm just using this as a fire for Adam and Brandel, as in to remind everybody it's ridiculously low interaction bandwidth. Brandel, I see you have your hand up.
I actually don't recall what it was up for. Sorry.
But this is why I'm coming back to the substrate. Addressability is one thing here, and actually pointing to different things in different, especially things that are not present in the same space. Yeah. In your document, they are close together, so it may be easier to do some sort of local thing with the software and standard PDF links, but actually finding out the substrate of what is that object you point to, and how do you create a docuverse that is not too reliant on the underlying transport technology. So with the web, with the servers, we have the servers baked in, we have the path baked in, we have the file name baked in an ordinary URL for accessing. And if any of those breaks, or you didn't pay your hosting fee or a domain fee, then that link is gone forever. So if we want to replace that and have some sort of substrate with the addresses and addressing that isn't too dependent on actually the delivery mechanism, and it could live on something like a BitTorrent or IPFS or whatever is a popular technology of the day. But how do you do the document? That is why I'm thinking about it. I know that it's a tough thing to just present to this group, but technologists often come with a singular technology, coming back with singular technology today. It's BitTorrent that will save everything. Just use this technology with this cryptic scheme, and it will. But if you think long term, not many many systems will survive for a decade even. So we need to think of a way of addressing that is robust enough to do that kind of linking text together, and so Brandel can use it for either 2D, 3D, whatever, but actually pull it in and send it in a bundle to someone else or store it that is not married to a silo, a database too hard. So we need a way to project it down to something like a file, or something that is inspectable, as easy to use as a web page that you inspect and look at and change the code. So that is what I'm pushing for or wanting here, that we need to solve that in some way to have a docuverse.
Yeah, this is the thing that Christopher Guttridge and I were talking about a lot back in the day, and of course also with Mark. And the way we wanted to do it was very, very simple: super redundancy when it comes to addressability. So you should be able to say the address is, and then you could have Bibtex plus a link plus a search term, and basically any different media. But of course, we need a standardized way to box those things together. I think that's hugely important. So that's how you find an external object. But then there's the secondary part. How do you find something in that object? We decided to look at the same logic. So we would say, however you find this book, whether you find it online or you own it, or you have to rent it or whatever it is, it's page 23, third character down or whatever. They have to be broken up to be so that not everything can, an URL or whatever, and an address can be one snake going through. There has to be different layers for different parts of the key. So Adam, I think we're on the same page and agreeing that it's a very important issue. When it comes to the kind of substrate, I'm of the philosophy that it should be document-based. And I'm not saying PDF at all, but I'm saying that you use the nice language, ship it, package it, and ship it. You've all been watching The Foundation, right? Oh, you haven't? Brandel, it's on your network.
I don't have any Apple things. I never bought Apple things before coming to the company, so I'm not very aligned with it.
Okay. All right. Here's advice: buy all the Apple things. Right. Just all of them. But on so the thing about the visualization of this kind of stuff in Foundation, it's all kind of dust things and hologram that does spinny thing and all of that stuff. So it gives the impression that there's a shape to the data, which I know we all here really like the idea of. But considering that it's spread across the galaxy, it's not really viable to connect things live. But it also introduces a redundancy. So, for me, it is, I'm sitting here with an M1 machine, super, super fast, super big storage. Why should a server do all the work? I can do so much work on this machine. I really think server should be more traffic cops. The Brandel system has something to sends it to Mark. Mark deals with it. Server only does that logically. So if that server goes down, okay, we'll use a different server for it, or a different mechanism. We could use RSS, we could use email, we could use HTTP. Here is the package that needs delivering. I'm not the right person to have any opinion of what kind of package. That's for you guys. But just opening up a JSON thing and doing all of these acronym things, I think you're both highlighting that may not be robust beyond a commercial product and a demo, and then we retire in a year.
Well, I mean, I put a note in the sidebar earlier about the fact that, in a sense of leaving aside even what documents are, but we have a concept of a document, and that can be quite fuzzy, but there is a thing, and there are things, and then there are sort of almost visualizations, Doug's view specs. And then the interesting sort of recitative becomes between the two things. Well, if I want to have this sort of view spec, what are the things that I absolutely must have to be able to show this document in this space? And that may include things or metadata that another view doesn't need. This is where, to me, it gets interesting. Whereas if I just interpose one or several technologies in the middle of it, then what I get is I get only the views that technology will support, and I probably get a bit of crimping of the style of the documents at the other end. it's quite a nice area to keep that middle bit deliberately fluid, not from an underpants gnomes perspective that, you know, magic cloud in the middle and then wonderful things happens, but just saying no, don't let that drive the design. Because if you formalize that too early, you're starting to write a hard edge spec about something when you don't actually know what you're trying to pass through the interchange between your documents and your views.
You're very wary, Mark, of not formalizing, you know, the whole premature formalization thing. But there is
because I think I've learned that it's just natural to do it. We want order out of the chaos, and it's not a bad thing.
Yeah, but Mark, there is such a thing as the difference between when something is personal and when it's published, right? When it's published, of course, you can do another version of it or edition or whatever you want. I've had to suffer that myself, but I think that the act of publishing is a significant act. Mm-hmm. I could imagine in such a network, you know, once it's out, and it is that form. You know, you choose to publish it in the form you want to publish it.
But I'm not arguing against that. What I was relating to was the fact that, you know, if we're having, in terms of thinking broadly and loosely, is just the fact that one of the things to elucidate, one of the things to formalize, but not in a heavy-handed manner, is the relationship, the necessary relationship between how much a document knows about itself, or if it doesn't know, what something else knows on its behalf, in order to do the sort of views that we want. And that doesn't, I don't think that constrains us at all, but it does allow us to start to put, you know, little bits of the jigsaw together, and to get a sense of what is, you know, what's doable but difficult, and what at this stage today is fanciful but maybe possible later, in which case we can park that as an idea and something where we look for things that will begin to fill the problem that we can't, you know, to solve the problem that we can't yet solve today. So no, I'm not arguing. I'm not saying don't formalize. No, far from it. It's more about just being aware of when. I think it's being aware of when you're formalizing, because often I don't think we are, and often we don't realize we've done it until it's too late, and then it's a do-over, and then it's expensive.
But that's fair enough.
Time.
That's fair enough. So one of the things brought up many months ago, Brandel, was the notion of bindings. So we were talking purely PDF at that time. And it was, let's say Adam is reading The Future of Text. He finds 3 articles he really likes. He decides to share them with you. You basically get the whole book, but everything is hidden except those 3 articles. You read, and then you choose to do an interaction such as show me everything with certain keyword, and you have access to the whole document right there and then. You then decide, actually, you want book 1 and 2 to be bound in the same way. So we've been looking at different ways to have the binding mechanism, and I'm leaning towards the binding mechanism also being a PDF. So imagine if you have a PDF that itself has no useful content other than binding information. So let's say that we have a good addressing scheme, like we use the VMID, we put some more work into that. So Adam makes this amazing visualization, and he then publishes it to us only as the binding. He doesn't include any of the things in it. The things in it would be also PDFs in this world. But it says, 3 pixels tall in the back here, on this location is PDF, VMID, so on. And not just VMID, all the citation information. Sends that to Brandel. Brandel opens it. He doesn't have that document, doesn't matter. There's information there to go look for it. But if he does have it, he has instant interaction to it. And when you've manipulated and you want to share it with me or Mark, you send that binding. So I'm just using that term. And it depends whether we have it or not. But instead of it's fancy JSON or something like that, it's literally a list and a PDF.
I love that as a way of thinking of it another way, as a view spec for a book. So I'm going to send you this book, but I'm going to send you half of chapter 3, a bit of chapter 5, and a couple of really funky things at the end, and a couple of references. And that, and you can unpack it beyond there. But I can send, I send you the document because it is the document, and also you might want to look more widely. And I'm not assuming any sort of commercial constraints, but being able to say, this is the sort of nub of this thing I want to send you, as I understand it. I have some really lovely idea, actually.
Thank you. So just before I give it over to Adam and Brando for specifics, just imagine you have this amazingly rich world, and then at some point you fold it into a document. All magic, imagine the visualization goes there, you give it someone, and they open it up in the same or different way.
Well, so I mean, one of the things that jumps out at me as you described these BMIDs, I'm not familiar with PDF specification beyond some basic, very basic work I used to do with Adobe InDesign API development. But I mean, that sounds very much like URLs, the universal resource locators and web links and packages of things. I definitely agree with Adam that link rot is such an issue that storage of like aggressive and preemptive storage of things for the transmission of stuff around is really valuable. In terms of what it would look like in an idealized form, another thing that is relatively important to me is the manner in which something was actually assembled, not just what it is, but how you made it, to the extent that you're willing to be able to kind of divulge that information, to the point of things like making blogs or writing maps or small children drawing illustrations that look interesting for a while, but then they ruin it by shading and coloring it in. I think that process is also really interesting and a valuable component of it. And so one thing that I would like to see as a sort of a prerequisite for any kind of system for being able to construct those things is an adequate information for being able to understand how a view is actually composed, which is potentially a little bit against the principle of something like a PDF, because it's fundamentally about what is on screen rather than necessarily the steps that an author took to assemble those things. And that's one of the things that I like about web is that there's a plethora of opportunity for encoding information that's non-renderable, that you have the ability to kind of interpret and build whatever then visualizations and representations you want. Something that I built recently that I'm quite excited about exploiting is being able to take an object on screen and then throw it around a little bit, and then it saves that as an animation. This happens to be in 3D, so that you can take a little toy car and have somebody play with it, and then that not just that car, but that play with that car is a saved artifact that you can see in augmented reality using AR Quick Look on your phone. I think that's really entertaining and a really compelling idea. And yeah, so one of the things that reminds me of is when I try to tell, because there are like 80 people who work on Apple.com, and I kind of do a lot of instruction for them, a lot of workshops and discussion about things. And one thing that they're not familiar with is they're not familiar with the full sort of idiosyncrasies of is the concept of object orientation. And so to talk to them about object orientation, I'd say like, how would you represent the money that somebody has? And they think that a number, obviously, sometimes people say a number or a set of numbers and a set of currencies, but you can actually represent the money that somebody has with just like a Boolean, yes or no. Do they have money or not? It depends on the representation that's relevant within the system. But if they're a coin collector, then you can't just say that they have 10 US. You need to know the provenance of those dollars. You need to know the condition of those dollars. You might want to know the story of those dollars, the representation of the relationship that people have to where those dollars came from. If there are any hilarious stories, you might want to have representations of those people in those stories as well. So object orientation per se is not a panacea. It still depends intensely on what you are doing in your system, what are the relevant parameters, and what you're going to do with them. Like the experience determines the substrate, and to that end. Yeah, I like to represent more. I like to have the opportunity to represent a lot more, not just about what a thing is, but how it's made, as well as also its relationship to other things. And so one reason why I like more open-ended technologies is the opportunity to encode more than merely what I intend to represent most proximally on a screen in a document.
So on that topic,
sorry, that was long.
No, that was wonderful, and that goes into exactly the bit on the screen that I'm sharing here. So this thing that we discussed earlier, select text as a dot, choose copy Bibtex. This bit here is the Bibtex that is currently copied from the test environment we have. This bit here is the VM ID. It can also be encoded below, say VM ID equals, but it is just, and we're still debating in the community what it should be, but currently it's just the name of the author and then the name of the document, and then the publication date. It should be enough. But, that is obviously a much bigger discussion. And down here, after the slash and the pound, this is where on the page this cited text is. That's the location. So, oops, and this is live, sorry. So all I'm saying here is we have an opportunity to really build something here, because there's no reason it shouldn't just say day. It could also say the exact second, according to UUTP or whatever, it was published. If it's a threaded dialogue, that's actually valuable. There's no reason why it couldn't also have a special section that says, for 3D environments, these are the following values that are relevant, so that everybody else knows to ignore it. This is the kind of stuff I think we can build as a community, because also we can have, at the time of being selected, it was connected to, even with link types, right? Any one of us could write this spec in an afternoon, but it has to be written together. And I think Adam and Brandel, the two of you, because you currently represent, you aren't that narrow-minded, but you currently represent two different kinds of environments. It may be very useful if we all enjoy a dialogue between you two, where you talk about what you think is important to encode. Because finally, don't forget, this stuff was in the clipboard. It wasn't even saved anywhere, right? And it made this citation here. That's what happened when it was pasted. So, over.
Yeah, and to some, this is kind of a code and a small implementation detail, but to me, this is a very, very crucial projection of information that has so many dimensions. I've been deep down. 20 years ago, I tried to do this in different XML formats, and then came RDF, and I did quite complicated systems for RDF representation. So, but so I have got quite some experience with doing exactly this, and this is why I think it's so important to nail as much as you can. You can't nail it perfectly, but have something to grow in and something that could be expanded in a progressive way over time, but also being thought through from the beginning. That I was a bit skeptical using Bibtex for that, because it wasn't designed for it, and it will put us in a corner. But now, just for having citation, it works fine, of course. But if we want to grow this and express things like, to have a very expressive format that is robust, lots of effort has to go through. Why I'm mentioning
my family's been calling. Let me just one second.
So why I'm mentioning it here is a kind of a call to action, and looking for like-minded people to nail some of these details down. And I think it's a very expert thing to do. It's easier to design, much easier to design software than to design formats. Formats have so much more nuances, and you need kind of a domain experience and domain knowledge and so many things to design formats. So I don't even pretend to be good at it myself, but I'm very interested in it, and I've been doing it a few times, and I think it's crucial. So it's not a thing you can design by committee over a Zoom call even. It's really, really hard work, and I think it's worthwhile, because text is so important, and finding a better thing that could replace parts of what HTML is doing right now, and the web is turning into an app platform, and some of the document preserving ideas is slowly getting lost in HTML and the format. So we, in a way, we need a new version of HTML that preserves the document idea more. Of course, we have EPUB, but it's very complicated and it doesn't express the simplicity and the usefulness that I think we need. But it's in the right direction for a kind of a bundling format, because that is exactly what we need for many things.
I see Brendan is unmuted, so he's ready with a comment. I just briefly wanted to say this collapsed into this in the document, and this looks funny now because reader has to be updated. But the point is that the data is there because, as you all know, it's in the back of the document. But also, if you look at that little dots and you look at these little graphics, right? There is no reason why, let's say we do take a VR space and put it in here. We couldn't have like a spark line like we talked about before that gives a visual indication stored in a JPEG even here. But because it is linked to stuff at the back, all the data is there to open it back up again. Yeah, Brendan, please. I have a feeling you have something to say.
I was going to agree with Adam that the writing formats is complicated. Something I would dispute is that it is easy to write software. I'd say that it's easy to write programs, but not to write software that people use, because like I've said before, it's a value system, and understanding what it is that somebody is doing, what they need to be thinking about, is a supremely difficult task. Not that programming itself is challenging, but because it's a fundamentally different kind of beast to understand what are the parts that are present within their mind. I don't know why I was unmuted, but I was chuckling to myself just thinking about the idea of throwing everything about other people's representation away, about just taking basically a tesseract OCR scan of the visual screen of what somebody is experiencing on their computer at a given moment, and then encoding that into a text stream or a document stream of some kind, so that it could be completely disrespectful, essentially, of not just whether you're on this website or not, but whether you're in this browser or not, and recording actions within an application as well. And it occurs to me that it's very similar to the concept of stereophotogrammetry. If you're familiar with the process by which people take a very large number of photos, there's actually an app that Apple has released first party. It's not really that user friendly at this point because it's sort of an ongoing piece of research and development. People thought that it was exciting enough to show to the world, where you stitch together those photos, you figure out what the surface of that 3D object is as a consequence of all of those photos. And you make a guess. Obviously, you can't know necessarily what that object is and its topology and the textures and the repeats on it and stuff like that. But it's a guess, and I really like the idea of as a provocation of throwing away everybody's representation prior, because as you know, a PDF can be written in completely unrenderable ways, not renderable, indecipherable ways. In terms of the position of all of the text, the sort of representational adjacency of it versus the visual adjacency. You can have pieces of text. I've done it in HTML as well, by taking a piece of text and actually putting it so that it's sequentially visually rendered, but then completely screwed up so that nobody would be able to copy paste it.
With live text, that's interesting.
Yeah, you can really screw it up because the thing is that if you have a character string on screen, all you know is that they have those corresponding XY positions, but you can represent that internally in the document any way you want, as long as they end up with those XY positions. Whereas copy paste typically relies on the structurally sequential information. So if it's not structurally sequential, it's not usable in a way that you can do the copy paste on.
I have to tell you about a product I had a few years ago that was almost a gimmick, but I wanted to make a 3D camera for the iPhone. This is before it had all that cool depth stuff. So I can't remember how I came up with the idea, but what I did was I said you have to scan. So you press the button and you have to move like that, right? So it would usually be for a person posing or something like that. You do that. So it's such a ridiculous thing, but great amusement based on what you said, Randall, throwing away the real data. All we did, we turned it into a video, right? And you showed the middle frame. And if you move the phone this way, play it that way, or that way, play the other way. And it really worked. I showed it to professors of 3D stuff, and they wondered what was underneath it. And when I said it's just a video, they really frowned, right? So it is possible to cheat. That was stupidest app ever. But anyway, sorry, old stupid days.
No, that's brilliant, and I think case in point of the representation depends on the usage. What you need to store is based on what the experience you want people to be able to have with it. But yeah, I was just thinking about the possibility of storing a dump of what the textual experience of an application or a computer environment is as an artifact that you can then kind of refer to as an unfolding process, because that's what you see. And it's interesting to think about using something like Google's OCR command line thing, Tesseract, to be able to pull those fragments together. And so you can look back at the source of truth to the extent that it exists with regard to URLs and things like that. Although unfortunately Chrome doesn't show, well, many browsers don't show full URLs anymore.
So
but,
that would
yeah,
be
I think that
kind of live text on steroids. It records everything, live text it, and dumps it in a timeline, basically, so you can move around in your digital environment or real environment as well if you have a camera, and it just collects all the text it sees.
This is stuff you shouldn't see, but, so yeah, I mean the live text is insane. I don't know if you've seen this demo that I do here, Randall, but I copied that text. I go to author and I do Command T to cite. Actually, let me not do it here. I'm doing Command T to cite based on that text. That's the book. It uses Google Books to search the full text. So my little scribble random text selection found Karen's book.
An interesting part there, of course, is that, of course, the Google Books may have all the text. The fact that you can't view it if you go to Google Books, it's copyright and all sorts of things. It's no, but I mean, it just came to me that lots of people wouldn't think that was there. They think that what they can see is. Goes back to actually what you were saying about, the sort of like the copy and paste and how you put stuff on screen. So the fact that if you go to Google Books, you can see, some of the pages, but not all of them. Yet the information is all there behind.
Yeah. So
and it's interesting that text now, before it came to die on images, but now it's suddenly alive. So it's the images are now richer if you have OCR readily available all the time. So it's interesting.
It's crazy, right?
Yeah. I think it's my favorite feature. Of the OS. I haven't used it that much, but when I used it, it's wonderful.
I mean, there are so many opportunities here. One thing is, of course, EXIF data in pictures. A normal picture with a normal iPhone has all kinds of stuff on it. When I paste that into Author, it asks me if I want that picture to be cited. And I can add stuff. I should be able to extract the EXIF data and put all of that as part of the citation, the nearest town it was taken, whatever I want to. It's such a great example of getting data, putting it in a shareable form for the thing that you choose to produce and publish, right?
Well, that's sort of what, and also from a very different perspective, that's also what things are trying to do with things like, Jupyter Notebooks. And this idea that yes, you have it's a sort of codey perspective of a dynamic text, but the idea there's data and you have data underneath something, because in the same way if you have the EXIF information with your image, there's potentially a lot more you can usefully do with it.
So I'm going to have to rush off in a minute, but I've heard a little bit about Adam's building perspective. Brandel, in terms of this community, what do you want to build? Community, tools, information resource. What's your feeling of how you want your casual interaction to be?
One of the things that I don't have a grand vision of a single thing to build at this point. I'm at this point, based on what I do, pretty happy to tinker on little proofs of concept ideas about what's important. The thing that I'm interested, there are two things that I'm playing with at the moment. The first is to the point of the way that text goes. Pull it back out. I'm also really interested in video.
Randall, you scratched out a little bit. You said to the point the text goes, and then I couldn't hear you for a few seconds.
Oh, sure. So Adam was saying about the way that text used to die in images. What can be mined from videos, in particular videos of dialogues, and how we can pull out structure from that. I think that would be a really interesting thing to play with. And the other part of that, which is similar but a different tack, is to see what can be pulled out of potentially actually Zoom by, if not, I'm not aware of an API that one has access to, but there is something called the screen capture API that Zoom, that the web makes use of, so that you can then potentially get the video stream of stuff that's happening within an application. What I'm not sure of is whether you can then intervene on that and read the pixels of it. But if it is the case, then it would be pretty straightforward to be able to do some high-level analysis of things like who's speaking and possibly how much movement that's happening in those pictures and things like that. I think that would be a lot of fun to play with. In terms of the community stuff, I'm interested. I don't have a vision right now of what I want to do with it, but I am interested in the way that people can kind of be brought together for co-creation. And to that end, I don't know if anybody interacted with folks from Hypothesis or knows much about how it works as an annotation layer on the internet. Because my old manager went to be the director of engineering, he's since left again, but he was there for a while, and I spoke a little bit with Dan Whaley at the demo at 50. Yeah, I'm interested in the way that people can be kind of mutually present on the internet and through documents, and what kind of impact that can have on the sort of the consequent social legibility of what things are for within that sort of massive store of documents. Again, I don't have a particular vision of what I want to do with that, other than keep thinking about what ways in which we be present on the internet and the ways that we can encode that. But yeah, that's where I'm at.
Yeah, I think what Dan Whaley is doing is great. We've had some meetings, but we've never really aligned. It's quite a few years ago now. Didn't align on specific thing to do, but yeah, no, absolutely brilliant work. Adam, did you want to comment as well, or do you feel you have said, or of what you feel like building in this community?
I think I want to continue working on some sort of the active reading and sharing of that reading. I like that because it's very concrete. It has a touch of spatial, the prototype I did before, where you take text out of documents and continue think on it. So, and also continue working on because that was active reading, but I want to nail down a bit more what the deep reading, assisted deep reading would look like in digital, where you think deeper on things, because I think that is so useful and creates a lot of value in society, when people think deeply about things.
I only met Douglas Adams a few times, but he talked about what he called digital graffiti, where you could write in a place and you could only read it in that place. It seems to be a bit of an overlap, but when you're talking about deep reading, Adam, it's very interesting, because I was talking earlier about how you know something and you don't know beyond that. You don't even know it's missing. And I'm having that experience now in reverse, in the sense of, you know, I've written a thesis. It's not 1,000,000 pages. It's quite long, but it's also very dense. And that's me painfully putting a piece here. And I'm putting a piece here. Is it the optimal structure for everyone to read? Clearly not. You know, no matter what I do, I'm learning how to do it for a specific kind of audience. So what you're talking about, deep reading, when someone gives you a material, for you to be able to rearrange that so that you can have a better understanding of that intent is a really big and difficult issue. You know, it may even involve some basic machine learning of, you know, please note this person has written the exact opposite over here. You know, that may be relevant. So, you know, so I'm just clicking on that link.
I realize it's actually a bad sell. There are videos of immersive reader mode in Edge, and they show things like being able to, at least in English, color nouns and verbs. But this concept of line focus, I think, is really, really valuable for folks to be able to kind of really look specifically at 1 or 2 lines at a time. And another thing that, it includes more space as well, which I really appreciate, because that's one of the things that I do while I'm reading things. So there are actually maybe videos that do a better job.
Yeah, this is the simple stuff we've done quite a while ago, and it's very, very primitive, but I do find it it helps in some situations, and millions of things that can be done along those lines. So thanks for that reference, and I will have a look at that properly. Yeah, to help you read and concentrate. Okay, I'm going to have to prepare for Doomsday on Thursday, and maybe the interview on Friday unless something happens. It'll be interesting.
I've got a quick idea for you. Well, when we're done, when you stopped, I would say it's separate to your idea of doing the links, but I won't bore everyone with it. It's just a quick and dirty idea that might just work.
Actually, that's funny you should say that, because it's the end of the call and it made my head go a bit funny. And, you know, there's often the joke about interpretive dance, you know, how it comes into these things. But Edgar, my little beautiful 4.5-year-old, he watched Spider-Man 2 years ago in a theater, in a circus, and the moves, he's really copied them. And then he's watched some breakdance videos. So, you know, after dinner, if he's happy, he'll do a special happy dance. And he will get down on the ground and he'll have one arm actually coming slowly out like that. And then he'll flip around. There's no reason we shouldn't try to capture that kind of stuff. You know, as an adult, it sounds like a joke. But of course, there is a lot of nuance that is sometimes relevant, sometimes not relevant. So, yeah. So thanks, guys. You are all obviously mentioned in the thesis as open office hours. We need to find a better name for the group. That's another task, but I'm eternally grateful. And I look forward to seeing you on Friday, I hope, if everyone can make it. All right, bye for now.
Right.